Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to start our next chapter, chapter 2, and go over the PowerPoint for it. And let me just tell you right now, if you've looked at the chapter, it's no fun to read because we're looking at the theoretical foundations of education. And that is a whole lot to go over. But we're going to try to just hit the high points. I don't expect you all to get everything in this chapter, but we need to understand that there's been a whole lot of research that's gone on for a long, long time about how people learn. And hopefully this is going to give you some broad background on all of the theories and different points of view that are out there concerning how people learn. And so let's take it nice and slow here and see how this all kind of fits together. So our first slide talks about educational technology and instruction. So how does the technology work with us trying to be able to teach students? Well, the first thing our authors kind of look at are instructional events. And these are all teaching methods and learning experiences used to support learning. Whether we have people in the lab, whether we have people sitting at desk working on individualized instruction, or else maybe worksheets that you've passed out, or else you're up there lecturing. These are all instructional events. Some of them may be formal, some of them may be informal, some of them may be structured, some of them may be unstructured. But it's all of those things together that are put together to support the learning environment. That's key. Now, the second point is understanding teaching and learning enables educators to see how educational technology fits in. So how is all this newfangled technology going to fit in to the teaching and learning process? Let's not be naive. Not all the technologies are going to get the job done. I had very heart discussion with a former head of e-learning for the Board of Regents. He told me that in his mind you could teach any course online, and I just told him that I respectfully disagree with that. Not every program and not every subject matter lends itself to online learning. And he had his research to back him up. I had mine. And so we just never had a meeting of the minds there. But yet, how does that technology fit in? Is it appropriate or is it not? Third point, learning is a transfer of knowledge and skills. So what we're trying to do is to get students to learn what it is we're trying to tell them and show them. If the transfer doesn't take place, then learning hasn't taken place. You and I have got to be able to make that transfer, and it's amazing how some students will get it, some students won't. And if you've been teaching for long enough, you'll notice that. So a lot of students, you have to just show them one time. Others, you need to show them more than once. And unfortunately, there's that other group that as much as you show them, as much as you demonstrate to them, they still don't get it. So they haven't really learned what it is we're trying to get across to them. And there's a broad range of theories on how individuals learn, and we're going to talk. That's really the rest of the chapter, talking about the theories on how people learn. So let's see what's on the next slide here. Well, it continues here. Learning is a complex activity and subject to individual perspective. So now, let's not fool ourselves. Learning is very complex. There's a whole lot going on whenever you and I are standing up in front of that classroom and those students are sitting at those desks. Some things are taking place that we may not see, we may not catch, but some things are taking place. And then, of course, if you have a activity-based kind of learning, then all kinds of things are taking place. But it's also very, very individualized. Everybody learns at a different rate. Everybody kind of retains their information individually. And so it's really based on the student's perspective. I said again, there's a broad range of theories on how individuals can learn. And one early approach that theorists kind of used was to look and try to understand learning, was to examine it as a communications process where people are talking and people are listening, and then the roles are reversed. The other person talks and then the other person listens. Learning occurred when information was transmitted to the receiver and feedback returned, and that completes the communication cycle. And so, as we continue with instructional events, proper planning and effective use of tools and methods are key to successful teaching and learning. Our learning needs to be focused. You and I need to plan and then line up the tools that you and I are going to need to get those goals and those activities accomplished. For us just to be able to walk into a classroom and just decide this is what I'm going to do today doesn't get it done. There needs to be a systematic process from day one that students learn incrementally more and more and more and more and more about the subject matter, and then hopefully at the end of that school year or the end of that semester they have gotten all of the skills that you and I want them to get. But we've got to be able to plan, and we've got to be able to implement that plan. So let's take a look at some learning theories. The first one, like we just said, an earlier theory was learning is communication. Now, that knowledge was transmitted from sender to receiver, sender being the teacher or professor, the receiver being the student sitting down there. That goes all the way back to Socrates there in ancient Greece. The knowledge was transmitted from one person to another. Then, if the student or the receiver had a question or else wanted to get more information, then they could then talk back to the sender and sort of give that sender some feedback, or that teacher, to feed them back whether or not they understood the concept or if they had a question concerning the concept that they wanted some clarification on. Now, once that information is received by the teacher or the sender, then he or she has to be able to kind of process that and evaluates it, and then formulates a response, and then maybe adjust the approach as necessary. How many times have you and I gotten a response from a student saying, I don't understand that. Can you explain it a little bit easier for me to understand? And then you and I have to kind of sit there and process it. Okay, how do I break this down into simpler terms? And then use maybe some other examples that maybe might be more appropriate. That's what is taking place on the sender side. Now, variables may alter the intended meaning. There's a whole lot of things that can kind of change the message that we intend to be maybe something else. And so we have to guard against that happening. Keep those variables from taking place. And let's face it, it could be a bunch of noise in the shop. It could be a fire alarm going off. Somebody decides today would be a good day for a fire drill, and you're right in the middle of an explanation, and it looks like the student is getting it, all of a sudden, boom, you've lost your moment. But yet those variables that you and I can control, we need to minimize them. Now, this is a little graphic right here of basically the communication cycle, and I'm going to try to do a little drawing here. I guess red will work. We got the teacher side right here. Got the learner side right there. Now, what strikes you right here about both of these two graphics? Aren't the two things basically identical? Sure. We're just looking at the same kinds of variables, the same kinds of outside, inside influences that affect the teacher, that are going to affect the student. But look at the difference right here. You got instruction going this direction, and the student is providing feedback right there. And that can be very, very different. But all the other things that affect us as people, as individuals, affect each one of us to certain degrees. And so all we're doing is looking at basically two sides of a very, very similar coin. Now let's see if I can move forward here. There we go. Let's look at some factors that affect communication. And our graphic here shows basically three factors: environmental factors, psychological factors, and personal filters. And now let's see what those things are. Well, environmental factors. There are many factors that might interfere and cause a message to be distorted, or blocked. I just mentioned one environmental factor. In colleges, many universities use instructors that may have foreign accents, and sometimes their command of the English language may not be as good as we'd like, and so a lot of students sometimes have a problem understanding the sender or the professor at that particular time to get all of the words that they're saying. On the receiver side, let's say they have a language issue. Their command of the English language is not that strong. When I was in graduate school, and also I've had a number of students when I taught public school that weren't born here in the United States. Many of them taped my presentations and lectures so they could go back and listen to it. And so they did not have the English language ability that they would have liked, but with time they were able to build on that problem, and it became less of a problem as time went on. It could include obvious and not so obvious factors like noise, improper lighting, or temperature. Let's face it, are you going to learn in a room that is either freezing cold or burning hot? I had a situation in a former classroom of mine. My air conditioner went out. Burnt, compressor burnt. And so I had 9 months of no air conditioning, no heating. And I pretty much told my students, come prepared. I had a coat there in my classroom, so the days that were cold, I could wear a coat till things warmed up. And many times I told my students, especially during the summertime, don't show up. We'll try to do some work online, because after the morning courses weren't so bad because the sun wasn't up. But around after 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, when that sun started beating down on the roof of my classroom, it got very, very hot, high 90s in the afternoon for some of my classes. There's no way my students could learn in that environment, but there was no place else to go, and so we just adapted the best that we could. If you can't see to read, you can have issues too. These factors will not affect all learners the same, and some not at all. Some were just as happy as they could be with it being 90 degrees in the room. I wasn't that happy myself, but it didn't bother them. I had some pregnant girls. Obviously, that was the last place they needed to be, given their condition. So not everybody's going to be affected by these environmental issues the same. What about some psychological factors? There's some individual differences that define and affect communication information. Different people process information differently. I mean, how many parents have lined their kids up and told them, this is what I want you to know, and not all of them get it. Now, a person's current emotional state may interfere with message reception. If that student has had, or person has had some kind of traumatic event, or is under some stress, they're going to be dwelling on that and not hearing what you and I have to say. And so their emotional state is important. Then even how you and I deliver the message can interfere. Let's face it, so there's some times where I'll be lecturing and I can see students just kind of turning out the lights. They're just dropping off. Whether or not, I'm just boring them to death by the way that I deliver my lecture. And at one point in time in my career, I was sitting behind a podium, and I was just stuck there like with crazy glue, and nobody could move me. Now that I'm a lot more comfortable in front of a classroom, I'm moving around. I can't stand to stay still. So just the way that you and I deliver information can interfere in the processing of information. Now, these different ways that students take in information are certainly called their learning styles. And these learning styles could be some barriers if you and I don't address them. And we'll talk more about learning styles. And you and I ought to be able to integrate into our lessons a number of methodologies that will address more of these learning styles to kind of catch everybody, because everybody learns differently. The third point is personal filters. An individual's values, heritage, and belief system can serve as a filter to information. These will certainly include the attitudes, cultural differences, and opinions that many people have. Let's face it, whenever you and I travel abroad in other countries, they have a whole different view of how things should and should not be compared to here in the good old USA. And of course, since America is kind of like a melting pot or a gumbo of a whole lot of different cultures, especially here in Louisiana, that we really need to kind of be on top of the cultural and heritage and belief issues that a lot of people have, because we have a whole lot of different countries represented here in this state. And of course, those filters can exist in both the teacher and the student, or the sender and the receiver. We all have our personal filters. And let's face it, I know this might be a stupid example, but I guess I'll use it anyway. You know, I'm a football fan. This is a wonderful time of the year for me. And I usually listen to a lot of other football lovers and get on a whole lot of discussions with a lot of other fans about a lot of times NFL football. Well, I'm a diehard Saints fan. Now, the Saints are my team, and all the other teams, are, as far as I'm concerned, are garbage. And so my personal bias filters a whole lot of information about the NFL that come to me. Because as far as I'm concerned, there's only one team, and that's the Saints. Now, that might certainly, it can be construed as a very negative and a very narrow view, but, you know, I'm a fan. And there are a lot of people like me too. And that's what makes, you know, this very lively and very thought-provoking. But my filter is my team. And so all the information that comes in to me about other things in the NFL gets filtered through that. And so maybe that might help to kind of explain that. Now let's look at a different perspective about learning. The behavioralist perspective. Now, what in the world is that? Well, it's very, very simple thing. That you and I will focus on behavior as a response to external stimuli. All right. How many of you have told your kids, Johnny or Susie, if you're good when we go to Walmart, I'll get you a treat? And so if Johnny and Susie are good, then you get them a treat when you get out to the checkout counter. And they are rewarded for their good behavior. Now, we would hope that the next time Johnny and Susie go to Walmart with you, that they're good. And so parents use this all the time to kind of reward good behavior. Now, if it's bad behavior, then you don't get the treat. You withhold the external stimuli. And so like that, they'll learn, hopefully, good behaviors. And that's the same thing when it comes to learning. It occurs as a response to rewards and punishments. You study hard, you participate in the class, you get an A, you get a good grade. You don't do good, you play around, you miss class, well, you get a bad grade. You get an F. Rewards, punishments. Do it all the time. But in this thing, learning is a passive response to the environment. You are reacting to the stimuli. You aren't actively engaged in the stimuli. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but you are always doing something for something. The people who kind of come up with this theory are some researchers named Pavlov. You know, heard about Pavlov's dogs, where he'd throw them a treat to make them salivate, and then ring a bell. And then after a while, he started ringing a bell and not giving them a treat, and they still started getting hungry and salivating. So it really wasn't the food that was motivating them, it was the bell. And then Watson, which is another behavioralist, and then probably the most famous behaviorist of all, B.F. Skinner. His research and his work into the behavioralist theory is really even felt today. Now, let's look at another group of people who have a little different perspective on learning. This is the cognitivist perspective. They look at learning as strictly a mental operation. What's going on inside our brains, between our ears. Learning from that point of view is explained by how somebody thinks. What do you think about something? What is the mental process that takes place when you are thinking about whatever it is that you're thinking about? And obviously, they think that learning is a whole lot more complex than just giving somebody a reward or punishment for a certain kind of behavior. There are some theorists that really did some really major work into this. Brunner, Ausubel, and probably the first person that really changed a whole lot of people's mind about learning is the works of Jean Piaget from France. He really revolutionized our view of learning. And so he's certainly like the founding father of the cognitivist perspective. Now, let's take a look at the constructive, that's a mouthful, constructivist perspective. In their point of view, knowledge is constructed as a result of the learning process. It's like taking blocks, and what you're doing is starting off with nothing, and you're starting to build blocks. One little block here, another block there, and then everything kind of fits together, and you build and you build and you build, and you get more and more and more and more knowledge as we go. Learning occurs when knowledge is assimilated or accommodated, and that gets back to the work of Piaget. Because Piaget looked at learning this way. A learner has to take the information in. And then, I guess for lack of a better word, is to make some sense of it. If they can't make sense of it, the chances are they aren't going to assimilate it. And I hope that kind of explains that. You need to be able to make some sense of what it is that you're learning. For example, if I'm, I guess, in the machine shop, and I'm turning some threads, let's say. All right. I learned how to turn some threads using a lathe. So I can make some good V-shaped threads. All right. Now, what's going to happen when the machine shop instructor is going to tell you, okay, now you're going to need to make some square threads. Well, whoa, wait a minute. All I know how to do is to make V threads. Well, as he or she will explain to me, that the shape of the thread is different, but the process to make the thread is very similar. There's some settings that are going to be very similar to do that. So I've got some prior knowledge on how to set my machine up. I can accommodate that new knowledge about square threads because now I have something to build on. And I hope that kind of makes sense. This view can either be individualistic, just basically learner by learner by learner, according to Gagne, or group-oriented, and the researchers are Vygotsky and Bandura. And let's face it, many times we'll do individualized instruction where we're talking learner to learner, but then also we do group instruction. Those of us that lecture to classes. Now, let's look at some cognitive styles. How do people think? Well, cognitive styles are basically the manner in which one thinks and interprets the environment. How do you visualize what's going on around you? There's an instrument called the Myers-Briggs that helps determine cognitive preferences. So they divided all these cognitive preferences, and we have a test instrument that we can give somebody to kind of see where they fit. Now, understanding how students will process and think and interpret what's being told to them and what's going on around them will help us to kind of develop environments that will be conducive to learning. And so here are your Myers-Briggs cognitive types. And I'm not going to go over all of them here, but I want you to understand this. Every one of these is the opposite of the other. Like your extroverts, well, the opposite of them would be introverts. If somebody uses their senses to learn, the opposite of that would be intuitive, where they would use their intuitive sense. Thinking, somebody that sits down and thinks all the time about something, versus somebody that decides on basically how they feel right then and there. They feel good about it, they do it. If they don't, they don't. Then judging. That's sort of an organized way of saying, okay, this is good, this is not good. How do I got some kind of standard by which I judge whether or not I need to know that or don't know that. Perceiving, hey, you just go with the flow. You do your own thing. You just do what you feel like doing. So you see how they are basically polar opposites of each other in this Myers-Briggs model. Now, as we go on with learning styles, what are the conditions under which one learns the best? Well, certainly if you know your learning style, then you can kind of focus on some kind of condition that will give you that kind of stimuli to kind of stimulate that particular learning style. It also helps to relate to individual sensory dominance. Get into like eyesight, tactile functionality, hearing, taste, smell, all of our senses. Which one of those are the best for us? And certainly, we could have our whole class of auditory listeners that listen with their ears and their and basically learn best by when they listen to somebody talk. We also have our visual learners that would, for them to learn best, they need to see it. Show me. Kinesthetic or tactile learners would learn best by holding, doing, touching whatever it is that they are trying to learn. You know, you're trying to learn how to fix a car. What better thing to do than to practice on an engine? Your kinesthetic learners would tear that up. Of course, visual learners could just watch you tear down the engine and probably get it. Auditory learners would probably just listen to it on a video or an audio cassette and probably get what they need to know. 3 different ways for people to learn. Let's shift gears and talk about intelligence. Intelligence is basically the inherent capabilities to learn and understand. Everybody on this planet has the capacity to learn. Now, Fact is, though, the level as to which people can learn varies greatly. We have some handicapped children and adults whose mental capacity wouldn't go a lot higher than basically a newborn's. Well, they're not going to learn a whole lot, but they do have the capacity to learn something. Some very, very basic things. And then, of course, you have those people who have the ability to learn all kinds of stuff. And put like we have our Einsteins and Stephen Hawkings of the world. There's one test of intelligence called the Stanford-Binet test that emphasizes the logical, mathematical, and verbal capabilities of people. So basically, how much math, and let's face it, math is kind of like a universal language. It doesn't matter what kind of language you speak, math is all the same. 2 plus 2 is still 4, no matter what language you talk. But then your verbal capabilities, how you can communicate. Now, recently, the work by Howard Gardner, he came up with the theory of multiple intelligences, because he said basically doing math and being able to communicate is not all that there is out there, because people can do all kinds of different things. Well, let's see what kind of intelligences that can be out there. Verbal, linguistic, of course, being able to speak and understand language, getting back to the math, but also musical. Let's face it, if we could put a lot of our learning to rap music, we would probably be able to solve a lot of our educational problems, because it just amazes me to no end how in the world some of my students can be singing to themselves to these songs and know every word, but yet when I ask them to tell me the definition of a fraction, or else be able to identify a noun or a pronoun in a sentence, or else be able to copy a file on a computer, they can't do it. But yet they know volumes of songs on their playlists. Visual is spatial, of course, being able to visualize and see things. And bodily kinesthetic, being able to learn best by manipulating things. Then there's another intelligence, interpersonal. What kind of interpersonal relationships do students build with each other, or people build one to another? And also intrapersonal. Then, of course, we have the naturalistic versus existential point of view. Learning in the natural world, or else existential, do things kind of happen that motivate how we react to what's going on around us. And here you see a listing of the multiple intelligences. And so you can kind of take a look at those. Being able to deal with people and also deal with yourself. And so these are very, there's a whole lot more to intelligence than maybe just doing math and be able to understand and speak and communicate. This is a very comprehensive view of human intelligence. Now, what does that have to do with teaching? Well, we can define teaching as a systematic planned sequence of events every day whenever you and I get up in front of those students. That's a systematic. We do it every day. It's done at a certain time, and we plan our methodology out every day. And it is a process that will communicate ideas and skills to our students. Now, you and I have got to be aware of something very, very important, and that's how good, what we're strong and weak at in our teaching style. Let's face it, nobody is perfect. We all have some strengths that we can build on as teachers. We also have some weaknesses that we need to be able to overcome and get better at. But we all have our own style, and our style will evolve as we continue in this profession. And learning theories and learning characteristics of students. You and I need to be able to take these learning theories and be able to kind of apply them to our students that are out there and our teaching environment. To understand that those situations are out there and do what we can to be able to stimulate all of these learning styles in a lesson. To be able to reach out and affect the lives of our students. Now, we kind of went away a little bit from our focus here about technology, educational technology. Well, teaching and learning and technology ought to work together to achieve effective knowledge transfer. All the technology that might be at our disposal should be used as a method to be able to for us to effectively transfer the knowledge that we want and the skills that we want to our students. And they utilize or tell us that a holistic systems approach is key to us doing that. Now, our educational technologies that we utilize to implement our plan ought to be selected after planning our instruction. We ought to know, be crystal clear what it is we want to convey to our students. That information, that knowledge, that skills. Then what we can, once we know that, then we can select the technology that will help to kind of enhance that. Our technology should never drive our instruction. Never. Technology is a component of the teaching learning process. It's one piece of the puzzle. Like I said, it shouldn't be what drives us to do what we do. Now, educational technology will include any resource that facilitates teaching and learning. And remember, it's any resource. It can be a workbook. It can be a interactive video game. It could be a virtual environment like Second Life. It could be a comic book. There's all kinds of shapes and forms that these things can have. But does it facilitate teaching and learning? That's the key. Now, this view of technology has evolved and broadened as we've evolved here. And it has also been like a component, and it's been consistent with the evolution of learning theories. Let's take a look at how that's evolved. In the 1900s, we started putting movies and creating movies to help teach people. Then as the technology moved into the 20s and 30s, you had slides, radio, sound recordings started to appear. And in the 50s, this wonderful thing called television. And so now we can see and hear things. And now we have television that we can watch things, sometimes live, back in the 50s. Now, today, that's it. And in the 60s, the audiovisual basically expanded to model close to today's view. You know, we've been watching live documentaries, live demonstrations, live events for a long, long time. Now, in the 70s, educational technology became redefined and expanded further to include all technologies, audio, visual, the whole 9 yards that are out there. Then in 1980, a new technology appeared, the personal computer. And once the computer entered our world, everything changed. We became digital. And today, we utilize every media and system that can support teaching and learning. And they come in all kinds of shapes and sizes, and we're going to spend time looking at these things. But look at the graphic. It still gets down to a teacher and a learner and some information that's got to pass from one to the other. You still got the feedback loop. But then you look at the content and the strategies to implement that content. The learner uses some learning activities and technologies, and then they evaluate whether or not they've learned it or not, and tell us, oh, teacher, I didn't get that. Can you help me? Things haven't changed in a long, long time. It's just how we do it has changed. And so you and I, not the salespeople, not administrators, not supervisors, you and I ought to decide how best to utilize that technology, because we know what happens in our classrooms better than anybody. What can we use to get the point across? And so that is it for this particular lesson. I know it was a lot, but it's probably one of the most important chapters of the text. So I am going to go ahead and stop our presentation right here. And chapter 3's lecture will be coming up shortly.